Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, I'm going to be looking back at and redrafting the 2009 NBA draft. And as many of you know, this is one of my favorite draft classes to look back on because it's one of the more talented, but also one of the more underrated classes of the last 20 years in the NBA. But before we get started, I do want to mention, related to this video, I did upload over on Gaming Logically today a 2K simulation in which I went back to 2010 and I redrafted the 2010 draft and then simulated to see what the league would have looked like if the best players were actually picked first on draft night in 2010. It's a really cool video. I really enjoyed making it, so go check that out, as some of you have already done with yesterday's video as well. I appreciate all the support over there. And really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload these kinds of videos every single day. We're going to begin number one overall. Originally it was the LA Clippers, and originally it was Blake Griffin that went first. It's not going to be Blake Griffin here, and I feel like this is a pretty obvious one, right? It's going to be DeMar DeRozan, who originally went ninth in... Okay, I had to stop myself there. It's not DeMar DeRozan. It's Steph Curry, right? Steph Curry has to go number one overall here. One of the most transformative players in the entire league. One of the most influential players in the entire league throughout history, not just in terms of the players that we currently have. Guy that's won multiple MVPs, multiple championships, no finals MVPs, but still a guy that has been so impactful in the league, and I would take his career over any of the players in this redraft. And yes, there's some health issues in the beginning of his career, and then obviously breaking his hand this past season, but there's nobody in this class that I would rather have than Steph Curry. Moving on now to number two overall, it's the Memphis Grizzlies, and I'm going to go with James Harden here, and I feel like these are two pretty obvious picks at 1 and 2. Steph Curry is a multiple-time MVP. James Harden also won an MVP, and although Blake Griffin is a talented player and has had some pretty high peaks, there's no reason that James Harden should not be the second overall pick here, going to Memphis instead of Hasheem Thabeet, and a Memphis team that just a couple years after this draft ended up making some nice deep playoff runs, and James Harden on that roster certainly would have changed things. A lefty backcourt with him and Mike Conley would have been a really, really interesting thing to see, as opposed to what we saw in Oklahoma City, even though that Thunder team became a finals team and everything with Harden there, and then we know what happened with the trade afterwards. The what if of James Harden potentially being in Memphis is a really, really interesting thing to think about. We move on now to number 3 overall, the Oklahoma City Thunder. As I said, originally James Harden. I'm going to go Blake Griffin here, and I think there are a couple of arguments that you can make against him going 3. I know it might seem like a relatively obvious thing for him to go 3 after Steph and James Harden, but I think there are 2 players specifically that you could have made an argument to be 3 instead of him. However, this is the direction that I'm going to go in. At his peak, Blake Griffin was an incredible player, and just, a handful of months ago, 8-9 months ago, this guy was, still a really good player in Detroit, had a really injury-riddled season this past year, and really that's what's held him back. He's continued to grow and adapt his game into a really, really good passer, someone that doesn't play above the rim as much, has developed his three-point shot specifically last year in Detroit to kind of compensate for the injury stuff and the loss of the athleticism, but still that's a huge part of his game that has continued to kind of decline throughout his career, but I still would rather have him over any of the other players left in this class. So I'm going to go with Blake Griffin, number 3 overall. Going to Oklahoma City to play with Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant and Serge Ibaka. That would be an incredible front court if it did happen all the way back then. Number 4 overall now, the Sacramento Kings, who originally selected Rookie of the Year Tyreke Evans in this spot. I'm going with Jrue Holiday, and you might be surprised by that selection, someone that originally went 17th overall, but I think he's the best two-way player left in the draft, someone that can defend even bigger players at just 6'4", 6'5", has great length, has strength, and is just a really, really good player when healthy. And again, that's been kind of his issue at times, is whether or not he can stay on the floor. But when he's on the floor, a really, really good dynamic two-way player, can get to the rim, can shoot it, does pretty much everything well, not too many holes in his game, and just someone that I would rather have over our 5th overall selection here. Originally, this was Ricky Rubio, and then the next pick was Johnny Flynn, the 5 and 6, the back-to-back point guards drafted before Steph Curry in this class. But for me, I'm going to go DeMar DeRozan here to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who originally went 9th overall, and really the only argument against him for going 4 as opposed to 5 here is just that Jrue Holiday, I feel like, is a little bit more complete of an offensive player. DeMar DeRozan is probably a better scorer and has that nice mid-range game, but hasn't expanded his game to the three-point line. And if I'm building a team, I just think it's easier to build a good roster around Jrue Holiday, or potentially is Jrue Holiday as a complementary piece, rather than having to make DeMar DeRozan my number 1 option out of necessity because of scoring being his number 1 skill, or just because he's not all that great of a complementary option, again, without that three-point shooting ability. Without the ball in his hands is a little bit tough. So nothing against DeMar DeRozan, it's just a personal preference for me. I'd rather have Jrue Holiday. If you want to make an argument in the opposite direction, I could certainly see how you would do that. And once we get past that group, I feel like there's a lot of different directions that you could go in. Number 6 overall now, I'm going to go with a point guard here from Minnesota. And it's Jeff Teague, who originally went 19th overall. Him and DeMar DeRozan both going to Minnesota would make a nice backcourt pairing. Made an all-star team at one point in his career, and it's just been a solid, steady point guard. Can get to the rim, never an outstanding three-point shooter, but can shoot it enough out there, to kind of make you respect that shot. And has had a nice career as a 19th overall pick, but you can start to see how the talent is declining throughout this top 10, but there's some really, really good depth, including some undrafted players as well that you can see in the still available group that we're going to get to. But I like this Jeff Teague pick. Him and DeMar DeRozan, as I said, going to Minnesota to play together. It's a nice little young backcourt there. Number 7 overall now, the Golden State Warriors, who originally selected Steph Curry here. I'm going to go Ricky Rubio, who originally went number 5 overall and I think was on a trajectory early in his career of someone that would have been a multiple-time All-Star and would have been one of the better point guards in the league, at least a top 5, top 7 point guard. And unfortunately just had a knee injury that was at the worst possible time for him and kind of caused him to take a couple of steps back. And he's had a good career. He's had a solid career, but has never, quite made that leap into an All-Star caliber player. And it looked like he was going to be on that trajectory. But a really interesting scenario there in Golden State. They still get a point guard, just not Steph Curry in this scenario. And if this happened at the time, if he went 7 to Golden State, they would have been ecstatic. People were really excited about Ricky Rubio. There was a possibility that he could have gone number 2 overall had someone traded up with Memphis because they already had Mike Conley. So he could have gone as high as 2 at the time. He went 5. Solid career, nothing outstanding, but I'm still comfortable taking him at number 7 overall here with the Warriors. Number 8 now, the New York Knicks. I'm going with Joe Ingles, who originally went undrafted. There's a couple of other players you could make an argument for here, but I like the all-around game of Joe Ingles. From a shooting percentage standpoint, he's been one of the best three-point shooters in the league over the last handful of seasons. Provides a little bit of toughness on defense, can guard a little bit. He's not going to be crazy good, but, can do some things. Is going to at least hold his own, obviously limited in his athleticism. But then he has a little bit of playmaking on the ball as well, where he can kind of fill any role. If you wanted to be a shooting specialist, he can do that. If he needs to handle the ball a little bit more on offense, he can do that as well. Really an interesting plug-and-play player. I really like Joe Ingles in this situation, and not necessarily going to New York to be a star. They're still going to need, some other players to step up around him to create any kind of championship situation, but he's not really going to do too many things to hurt you, so I like Joe Ingles here, number 8 overall, making a huge jump from undrafted to the 8th player selected here in our redraft. Number 9 now, the Toronto Raptors. I'm going with Danny Green, who obviously just won a championship with the Toronto Raptors. He originally went 46 and developed into one of the better shooters in the league. At one point held the finals record for most threes in one finals, and I believe in a finals game as well. Kind of turned around his career there in San Antonio, had a nice year in Toronto, and is now with the Lakers. And a guy that couldn't really find his niche initially. I believe he went to Cleveland at first and then found his way to San Antonio, but again, has developed into one of the better shooters in the league. And I would just love to have that level of shooting on my roster, to know that I can space the floor at least one position, and developed into a really nice defender as well in San Antonio and in Toronto. So I like this Danny Green pick here at number 9 overall. And then number 10, the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm going with Patrick Beverley, and you could have made an argument to have him at 8, maybe even 7. And he's an interesting player, right? He's someone that is a little bit of a throwback in the point guard mold, as not a guy that's going to play make a ton for you, not a guy that's going to score a ton, but can defend and is at least a serviceable shooter. So if you have other stars around him, like Kawhi Leonard, like Paul George, that need the ball, Patrick Beverley is a really nice fit. He's someone that's not going to back down from a challenge. He's going to provide that toughness that you need, and again, can defend really, really well, can really be just annoying throughout the game for a lot of players. And then again, that shooting stroke, it comes and goes at times, but still can at least knock down some shots on occasion. And so I'd like to have that on my team. Some interesting players that were left out of the top 10 for me here. I highly considered Darren Collison at number 10, but I just picked Patrick Beverley instead. Patty Mills is another option. Wesley Matthews is another option. That's what kind of stuck out to me out of this draft, is obviously about everything at the top, but the further you get into it later in the second round, and even undrafted players, and you're looking at Patrick Beverley at 42, Danny Green at 46, Patty Mills at 55, Joe Ingles and Wesley Matthews both undrafted, even DeMar Carroll, Wayne Ellington, Taj Gibson, Darren Collison, outside of the 20s, there's a lot of serviceable rotation players, and even sometimes more than that as well in this class. And I think that gets forgotten a little bit, and understandably so with all the talent at the top. But one of the more talented and deep draft classes that we have redrafted to this point, with a really solid top 2 and top 3 with Steph, James Harden, then a little bit lower Blake Griffin, a couple of really nice all-star caliber players there in the middle, and Jrue Holiday and DeMar DeRozan, and then some solid guys as well the rest of the way: Jeff Teague, Ricky Rubio, Joe Ingles, Danny Green, and Patrick Beverley. For me personally, rounding out the top 10 in this 2009 redraft. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.